When oxygen is scarce, animals have to use anaerobic metabolism as a strategy. In anaerobic metabolism, glucose goes through glycolysis to produce 2 ATP, and pyruvate, which goes through the tricarboxylic acid cycle, TCA cycle, which produces about 30 ATP, and NADH produced in glycolysis as part of the hydrogens that provide this 30 ATP in mitochondria. But that process requires oxygen. In the absence of oxygen, the pyruvate cannot go through the tricarboxylic acid cycle, and the NADH cannot feed their hydrogens to mitochondria. Therefore, in a vertebrate, those hydrogens are added to pyruvate to make lactate, which in turn can pick up a proton to become lactic acid. The removal of this hydrogen regenerates NAD+. That NAD+ is absolutely required in glycolysis to generate these 2 ATPs. In vertebrates, the hydrogen acceptor is pyruvate putting that hydrogen on lactate. In invertebrates, the hydrogen acceptor can be ammonia, NH3 to NH4, which can be excreted, ethanol, which can be excreted, acetic acid, which can be excreted or metabolized, amino acids such as alanine, and other compounds such as succinate or even lipids. Many of these have the advantage that they can be metabolized later if oxygen becomes available, and therefore the energy of those bonds isn't wasted. Vertebrates use lactate and lactic acid because that's easily recycled. So what happens when an animal is exercising hard? This is 100% of maximum metabolic rate, and on the x-axis is time. An animal that is inactive, its basal metabolic rate might be here somewhere around 20% or 30% of maximum. And we're going to be concerned with somewhere around 70% for most animals. So what's called the anaerobic threshold. Below that threshold, the lungs, gills, etc., get enough oxygen for aerobic respiration. But above it, animals must switch to anaerobic respiration. Below the threshold, there's enough oxygen for the TCA cycle, and above it, animals must rely on glycolysis. So what happens over time if an animal rises above that threshold? So our animal is not working very hard, suddenly begins to work hard, and rises above the anaerobic threshold, stays there for a while until it either cannot continue or is able to stop working that hard, drops back down, and is now under the anaerobic threshold. During this period, myoglobin released its oxygen stores. Creatine phosphate lost its phosphate, and there's a buildup of lactic acid, making the blood more and more acidic. This is a period in which the animal has gone into oxygen debt. It will take time to get the oxygen to regenerate myoglobin, put phosphates back on creatine, and metabolize that lactic acid, converting it back to pyruvate through the tricarboxylic acid cycle. In this first period of recovery, myoglobin picks up oxygen And along this same time span, creatine phosphate is regenerated. It takes a much longer time to metabolize the lactic acid. So this long period here is the recovery from oxygen debt. How long is this period? For you, for mammals and birds, it's measured in minutes. We can survive only a brief time with anaerobic metabolism. For many invertebrates, think of oysters or clams, it can easily be days. For hibernating cold vertebrates, this can be weeks to months. For example, a frog in winter at the bottom of a pond, completely inactive, or a turtle hibernating in a pond. There are strategies animals can use in order to extend this period of anaerobic metabolism. They can increase creatine phosphate, increase myoglobin, increase hydrogen acceptors, increase buffers. For example, turtles use the calcium and phosphate in their shells as a buffer during winter, coming up at the end of winter with much less calcium phosphate. They can decrease metabolic rate by cooling tissues. Diving mammals cool their limbs and cool most of their body except for their swimming muscles, brain, and heart. So multiple strategies will stretch this period out, allowing an oxygen debt to accumulate for longer and sometimes allowing recovery quickly. How long is this recovery period? As a human, you've experienced it lasting for many minutes to hours, and complete recovery can take even longer. In fish, for example, a trout that has been caught and then released by a fisherman, it can be a day, and during much of that time, they may have to be resting, unable to do any vigorous exercise or swim hard. Turtles, after hibernation, can require much longer, many days or weeks, to replace calcium phosphate.